Greetings. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and thrilled to see you all. And I want to thank Barry for inviting me and the team at CODA to helping him. And Robin, I'm so glad that we're together. I've known Robin forever. I wanted before oops, I wander around. Before wandering around, I'd like to know how many of you take pictures? Oh, practically everybody. That's wonderful. And do you usually use an iPhone or do you use other things? iPhone. Me too. But I also use some others. Okay, great. So I've really so much enjoyed, I know these people from CODA, but I've heard in so much more depth and breadth what it is that they're up to, and it's been very interesting, especially how people got interested in photography and the very different things that they have done with them. I will talk a bit about why I take photos anyway, but actually it is only one of the things that I do. I am a retired anthropologist, as Barry said, and I want to share with you that although I have a PhD in anthropology, I heard an art historian say once that anthropology is less a discipline than an attitude. I think that that's true. We hope there's some discipline to it, but it has to do with understanding what other people think, how they view the world, and taking nothing for granted, trying not to impose yourself on it. I think that at a deep level, that actually informs the pictures that I take. So let me just say that I'm a cartoonist as well as a photographer, and I drew this of myself. I forgot to put in a camera. I think maybe I'll do that. An iPhone would fit there. And if you look at my website, which I do not recommend because it's always out of date, here's some of the things on it. There are links to my writings. I'm a cartoonist, as you see. This, what would really taste good is a peanut butter jelly sandwich instead of strange root vegetables and so forth. This was for a journal called Gastronomica. There's a series of food cartoons. I've recently finished a children's book in watercolor and pen and ink, which is the first time that I have done a children's book, and actually much watercolor either. Some years ago, I did a documentary film called El Oficio del Arte, or the work of art, about artisans in Pátzcuaro, in the region of Pátzcuaro in Michoacán, Mexico. I did not do the cinematography. It was done by a friend who's a professional, so that it's very good cinematography. I was a producer and director. But it was great because I got to learn the background of what it is that people do and made lots of friends. And now I go back to that region several times a year. And then there are the photographs. So I'll turn now to photographs. I have taken photos since I was 20. My father gave me a brownie first, and then he said I was ready for a Pentax. So I took that, I used the Pentax during most of the last quarter of the 20th century. And then digital came in. Took me a while to adjust, but while I was in Mexico, I started taking pictures and began to develop what I think we can call my style, which is non-iconic. That is to say, I don't like taking pictures in the same way and from the same point of view as others. So this friend who had a cultural center gave me a show, and we called it Moments of Light, and that's where I got this name, Moments of Light. Oh, I was looking at this, sorry. That was in, I don't know when it was, 2010 or 12 or something like that. And then I came back and began thinking of myself as possibly a real photographer, a serious amateur, and began taking some workshops and so on. But how I began to develop what we might think of as my style was in Canada. My family has an old cottage there. I used to call it a cabin, but then I found that the Canadians call them cottages and that it's a verb, as in to go cottaging. So now I call it a cottage. And I took this picture, one of the few staged pictures that I have taken, with my bathing suit hanging there and so forth, so that you can see that it's a totally ordinary cottage. Very pleasant, comfortable. My father's cousin built it in the 1950s. But what's special about it is the surroundings. Right outside the deck, there is a marsh, and eventually the back bay. We can go swimming in the water, which is clear but very slippery rocks. It's full of birds and wildlife. One day when I was on a kayak, I found the local heron choking down a fish about twice as big as itself at the end of the island. And I had my iPhone with me, of course. So I was able to take this picture. I think that it shows my extreme virtue as a photographer, that I was able to get both the boat and the island to point at the bird, and to get the clouds to form an arc above it and below it. So eat your heart out, you wildlife photographers. The place has beautiful sunsets. So one day, 10 or 12 years ago, I was out looking at the sunsets, and even though I knew it was totally trite, I was taking pictures of the sunset. So this went on for a bit, and then I looked down and saw the brilliant colors reflected on the water and in the mud. I call this picture Mud Dreaming of Glory. Here's another. It's because of pictures like this that people say that my photography is abstract. Well, it's abstract in that sometimes you're disoriented and sometimes there's nothing figurative in it. But I think that it's documentary. It's not abstract, it's not made up. It is simply what was there, and a glimpse of what was there and was passing. When I was beginning this and realized that I'm more interested in light than I am in objects, I said to a friend that I was a photojournalist of the light. Like a photojournalist, you have to be there at the right time and the right place, and you have to be prepared to get the picture, and you don't take things in and out. I do a little bit, but very little. And it is documentary, but the big thing is that it is really a momentary thing, and you must be prepared. So here are a few of the pictures around the island. I think so too. Like, I'm especially thrilled when a boat passes and you get these wavelets and they contrast with the black lines of the reeds. One of these, maybe this one I call Nature's Plaid, with things going in two directions. Night falls. As the evening wanes, the colors soften. When you go to the other side of the island, you see the back bay and the windswept pines. Windswept pines are what everybody in Canada paints and takes pictures of, because something called the Group of Seven did that in the 30s and 40s. And I can't tell you how many windswept pines appear in all photography shows. And people, this is what they buy. I mean, people like to see this. People like to see the same thing again and again. And it's not that they're not beautiful, but it's just that it's the same view of things. And I have this urge to ask people to see things differently. At the end of the island, the moon may appear. And as soon as oh, something got skipped, sorry. Here we are again in around the island with these calligraphic reeds. This is the one that looked so much like Bob Mars, one of his that he took in the Sierras. So I'm interested in light, and I've organized some of this to talk about light's spin-offs. So reflections are one of light's spin-offs. Here I call this series, if it is, Clouds Underwater. Often the back bay is as still as a mirror. This, as you see, could be a pastel, and a friend of mine who is a pastel and watercolor artist, Susan Patsy, asked for some of these pictures as inspiration, which I was thrilled to give her. She has one that's modeled on that. This is the last in this series that I'm going to show you. When I showed these pictures at Open Studios for the first time, I was told by Shelby Graham, a local artist, that I was doing intimate landscapes. I had never heard the term. But intimate landscapes are landscapes that they're about nature and so forth, they're landscapes, but they have no horizon line and they're relatively close, they're intimate. Let me go back to this and just ask you, what do you think it does when there's no horizon? When there's no horizon, what does it do to your perception?
You focus on something that's of interest to you.
You focus on something
that's of interest to you.
that's of interest.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It changes the notion of space. I think it expands what the possibility of space is.
Wow, that's great. Many people would say the reverse, because you don't have the openness of the horizon. You have a smaller focus, but it's very interesting to think of it expanding it. Pardon?
But looking into water, but it's reflecting the universe.
Beautiful.
You feel like you're there rather than just looking at it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like I could fall into it.
Wonderful. This is what I hope that people think or feel or perceive when they look at it. In a way, it expands space because what Western art has been about since the Renaissance, I mean, until the Renaissance canon collapsed, was looking at things, creating a three-dimensional space in 2 dimensions. This is one of my favorites, which confounds space. You see, you have this above and below, and it's very hard to tell where the water line is. You can look closely and you see that it stops being straighter and it starts being a little wigglier. But then those lily pads don't reflect. And so instead of just being up and down, it's coming at you in this way. So it's quite a confounding picture when it comes to what we're used to looking at. I feel as though part of what I am doing in this kind of picture is they might be slightly out of focus. Many of mine are not, but they might be slightly out of focus. But the point is, there's no horizon line, and it's inviting you to melt into the scene, to lose the self. And I have a little didactic lesson for you about this, which is that perspective in the Renaissance had to do with a single eye looking out and seeing the world as a facade, really, to turn it into a picture. And a lot has been written about this by philosophers. And I want to show you something I showed when I was teaching. This is called the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza. This is a picture of the Teatro Olimpico from the correct point of view. Here is a floor plan of it. You can see that it moves off and there's only a single point of view where things make sense. That was where the ruler stood. Anyway, I hate this kind of perspective as not as a form of art. I mean, there were great pieces of art and so forth, but it's amazing how pervasive this way of looking is. I think, for instance, of Carlton Watkins. Did I say that right? Carlton Watkins? Oh, very famous 19th century photographer. He has a picture called The Best General View of Yosemite. Now, there isn't perspective, but he's on a high point, and this is what it is. It's to see the whole, not a part. Okay, so much for the Renaissance. Fun with pictures. So, as I say, I make things. I like to make things. So one of the things that I did with these pictures is create a little booklet called What's This Gadget For? The front matter is the rocks, which I'm not showing you pictures of, but they are so gorgeous. It's the Canadian Shield, and there's so many colors and stripes of things and quartz and lichen, and it's simply gorgeous. But what I did was take the old stuff which my great aunt had left and put it on quilts that she had made and create a question, what's this gadget for? And then paired it with the colors of things. This is from the PDF from which it was printed. And that's fun. I have a bunch of those at the back, which people can buy if they're interested in. But it was just a fun project to do there. Another thing, I'm thrilled when people buy my pictures and do something with them. A friend loved that picture I just showed you, and she said that she wanted to have it made into wallpaper. And she had had some that was stock wallpaper done in Sweden, so we organized it, and she got this, and it helps her small condo to expand the space. Okay, here's one not on reflected light, but slanted light. I call it the Pescadero Beach series. It was very late in the day, and it was in late November, Thanksgiving. And I was with friends on the other side of the beach, the other side of Highway 1, right next to the water, in a cabin that they had bought in the 30s. I went out, the host said, come back in 15 minutes when the turkey's done. Fortunately, I had my telephoto and a good camera, and I went out, and this is what I saw. So this was actually the last picture that I took. At the time that I took those pictures that you saw, the sun was a little bit above the horizon, and so it was at the lowest slant that you can get without it being dark. I sent this to a professional photographer to ask him to choose what was best, and I sent this just for context, and he wrote back that he thought that this was a good picture too. It's been really popular. Art historians love it because it looks like abstract art, and it also is very peaceful. Nothing's going on. It's just color and texture. So when I exhibit them, I anchor it with this so that it doesn't all look the same. This was to show that it was so low that a low rock creates a shadow. The sun was so low.
Where were you standing when you
I was on a
shot that?
cliff.
Hmm?
I was on a cliff looking down.
Yeah. How high above the sand?
I would say perhaps 30 feet, something like that. Yeah, I had a telephoto. Mhm. So one more fun with pictures. So I had, so a friend wanted this for his San Francisco apartment on Russian Hill, which overlooks the bay, and it's a corner apartment. And what he said, we were looking at what art he could possibly put in there that would be nice. And he said, I said, it's really gorgeous. You know, you don't want something tight. You don't want something too, anyway. And he said, yes, I've thought I should put mirrors in there to show the bay. So we laughed, and I said, you know, that actually is a brilliant insight. Let's make something that's as close in color and mood to what you're seeing, and so forth. So this is what we chose. With the help of his designer, hung it on the wall. It was perfect. So this is when the place is being redecorated. So that's why it looks like a mess. But it works out really well there. And yeah.
Shelly, is
Yeah.
it a metal print?
Yeah, it's a metal print, which is not shiny. It's a matte metal print. Okay, light spin-off, shadows. One of the things that attracts me a lot is shadows. Here's some favorites from Mexico from last year and this year. I was in Oaxaca for Day of the Dead, and you know, in Mexico they put papel picada and anything. And you can't imagine, you look up in Mexico during a festive occasion and it's festooned with all kinds of things. In Oaxaca, that year, they had little streamers of things. And they fluttered in the breeze. This was on an alley, a small street, late in the afternoon, and this is certainly one of my favorite pictures of shadows of that era. Those are all shadows. I call it a murmuration of fluttering flags. Also in Oaxaca, on a different day, I looked up from drinking my cappuccino in the garden of the ex-convent San Pablo and saw the most extraordinary art installation that, I loved it. You can see that it's casting shadows and that this was made, obviously inspired by papel picada, but made out of some sort of plasticized fabric, I believe. The genesis of the shadows was there in the middle, and it extended out. This is from under an arch to see those things. This is underneath it. And this is by the church. I call this picture, what do I call it? Everything all at once. Not everywhere, but just in a corner. The artist in an interview said that in this particular installation, he said in Spanish, the shadows are the protagonist, which is, I think, a wonderful way to put it. Just last month in October, 2 months ago, I was in Morelia for the International Film Festival. And at the end, there's a place called Jardín de las Rosas, and the cinemas thing is on one side and restaurants and a conservatory of music are on the other. And these wonderful trees were covered with panels of crochet. I just have to pause and say that people in Mexico decorate things so wonderfully. People in the market arrange their fruit. People at home arrange the stuff in their kitchens. The level of design everywhere is amazing. Anyway, here was this. And the pathway leading to this area was covered with the same crocheted panels, which at 3 o'clock in the afternoon cast, oops, there it is, cast shadows on the walls. Okay, here, this has nothing particularly to do with light. Muros de Mexico. In 2000 and I forget, 14 or 15, I decided I was not going to Mexico regularly at that time, just once in a while, but I took a brief trip to Querétaro, where a friend of a friend had a bed and breakfast, and I thought that I needed to have a break, a surcease from sorrow. And I went and stayed in a little apartment and came out, and I could not stop taking pictures of walls. Here's a quick thing of it, and I'm sticking it in here because after seeing this at Open Studios, Mark Overgaard of the Coda asked me to talk to Coda. And so my first meeting with Coda was giving a talk, which I felt really weird about since I'm not a professional. I'm just a serious amateur. but they were extremely nice and have continued to be. Okay, so here's some one by one. And I say this is not about light in part because I was paying no attention to where the light was. I just couldn't stop taking pictures. So some of these are well done for light, some of them not. But here you do see at least what they look like. I love the deterioration and the, I like the multiplicity of it. I like the complexity of it. I like how evocative it is. One thinks of the history of the, these walls have seen a lot of life.
Like archaeology almost.
It is. It's like archaeology. Or like modern art. And it's so funny because some of these things, like if it's red and then they don't have the right color red, so they'll paint it fuchsia. And then sometimes it's to get rid of graffiti. And then they use the repainting to be the inspiration for more graffiti. Somebody does. So these pictures of walls, I enjoyed so much, and it got me interested in walls. And I began taking pictures of walls in places that I went. And I'm going to show you just a few from Bali and from India. But I want to say that when we think of walls, what do you think a wall is for?
Murals.
Murals. A very sophisticated answer.
Hold up the roof.
To hold up the roof, one.
Divide space,
Close.
Protection, to enclose.
divide space.
Right, to divide space as a barrier. I think actually that, I mean, those are things that we think about. And I think it's because we've been through the Bauhaus. Form follows function. We want it to be clean. We want it to be smooth. We want it to be white or at least a solid color. And I think that we live in a world in which we see the world as empty and filled with objects, which is not the way many humans think of the world. So the built environment that they are in is quite different. The thing is, it didn't occur to me to ask people in Querétaro whether they didn't want to just get rid of all this stuff because it was ugly. This is just the way life is. My guess is that they like it the way it is, but I don't know. But no one's done a cleanup or anything for many, many years. So here are just a few things of the living walls of Bali. They do not have graffiti in Bali, so far as I could tell. What they do have is things growing out of them, lichen. In the tropics, everything grows. And then here's some painted walls of India. This is in a town. And there they use it as announcements, you know, so-and-so's getting married. We're having a party. Here is the local god. This was in Orissa. This is Jagannath. On the other hand, in the tribal area of Orissa, which I was privileged to go to, they paint their walls with mountain shapes. I did not go into this and I don't speak any Indian languages, but this was this is an advertisement for someone who's running for office. Don't you wish we had that for people running for office? These people were threatened by, as usual, mining people who wanted to destroy their sacred mountains. A story that goes on and on. And then, as every place in India, people take off their shoes before going into the house. And then also in Orissa, I am crazy about these incredibly sculptural shapes. In India, there's been a tradition of living in caves, especially for people who are monks. This was something like someone who, this is one of the centers of Buddhism. I think the Buddha was said to have been born here or something. Anyway, I put in just a few because of time. Back to Mexico. I mean, you see this sort of thing all over, and to me, it's enchanting. This is an art student asked me to go to her place to a party that they were having, and this was what was in the walls of the patio. You know, it's deteriorated, and then people paint them. This is completely different, but I love it, so I stuck it in. This was a jail from when the Spanish were in Pátzcuaro, and I thought it was so beautiful. It's been preserved in a museum in Pátzcuaro. This is the prisoners marking time. Every seventh one is a cross. So it was, so anyway, you see these things. This was in Mexico City, and I like this very much. I was wandering around with another photographer, and we wandered into this. This is not a great picture, but I put it to you for context. This is where the Triqui, which is a group from Oaxaca, they all hang out there. I didn't see the back where they live, but this is where they stage things that they go to take, that they go to sell. And look at what they have done with it. Very influenced by the Zapatistas. And you can see Che over there. Okay, how is my time?
About five, 6, 7.
Okay, we'll see. I'll see if I can get through this. Lights, spin-offs, the contrast between very dark and very light. There's a place called Anahuacalli in Mexico, which is Diego Rivera's construction. Did it with an architect and painter named Juan O'Gorman, and he designed it, and it now houses his collection of pre-Columbian art. He wanted it to be sort of, I don't know whether gloomy is the word, but you know, serious. And it's a strange looking building, which I find enchanting. The walls are super thick, and as you see, light comes through. I took this picture maybe 10 years ago, and this one more recently. Either the camera's better or I don't know what happened, but you can see more variation in color. The walls are all painted, the ceilings are painted. The light coming through seems to me quite beautiful. And then here's another light spin-off, Reflections on Wild Animals in Anahuacalli. Another thing for you folks who do wildlife photography. These stay still. They have a big window, so it's very hard to get pictures of the actual objects. So what I did in a number of them was take advantage of it, and it just becomes part of the design element to have the reflections visible. I believe this is a duck. Pre-Columbian artifacts, you wouldn't think so, but they often are so amusing. They're very funny. Those dogs, especially the Chihuahuas, are so amusing. Okay, a heron. Yeah, as I say, I rather like having the reflections as part of the design. Then you can go down, you can leave. Okay, now I'm finishing. Isn't that good? Fun with pictures. I have not shown you pictures of people for the most at all, I think. I have lots of pictures of people and I really enjoy pictures, taking pictures of people. But this is just I had a wonderful time on this particular workshop some years ago to Joshua Tree. I was just learning to use my Sony camera. It was my first mirrorless camera, my first Sony camera, and I thought I'd take that because the assistant to the person conducting it was named Joe Platcomb, and he used a Sony. So they promised that they would help me. So this was not the first picture I took, but it was the very beautiful, and several people were taking pictures of that sort. But then I looked up and someone else was taking it, but from a higher point of view. The thing that I love about this image is that you can see what he's taking in the viewfinder, And also I love this is the autofocus. This is not my virtue, but it's incredible that you can see his shoelaces and the thing that keeps on his hat. I also have a series on silhouettes, but I didn't have time to show you. But silhouettes, if you can capture it in such a way that it is revealing of character or stance, then silhouettes are so interesting and dramatic. But this is the thing that I want you to really see, which is, it was the first day or night of this workshop, which was supposed to be about taking pictures of stars. And I was back at the parking lot with Joe. He was showing me where to press the shutter, more or less. I was in no shape to go to try to take pictures of stars because I didn't know, on, off and things on the camera. And I turned around in the parking lot, and this is what I saw. I almost always use natural light. So this is natural light and the light from the car. And what you may say is happening over there. These two guys who were Kevin Osborne and Mark Deakins were not paying any attention to taking pictures of trees or stars because they already know how to take pictures of trees and stars. So they were futzing around and making elephants go across the sky in their pictures and things like that. And then they were using colored lights. And what you do is you put a flashlight or a colored light on the tree and take its picture. So that's what they were doing. And I thought that I could use this as a Christmas card. Okay, that's my last picture.
Okay, thank you, Shelly. Well, quick question. Mark.
So Shelly, in one of your photographs, you had, it was a sunset scene, but the sun was in the picture. And I want to know, when I try that with my iPhone, it's not working. How did you do that?
I'm not sure which picture you mean, but it is very possible that it was not with an iPhone. However, I have to say that iPhones now, you can use them in RAW, and with the most recent ones, it is hard to take a badly exposed picture, very hard. But also when it comes to sun, what you can do is press it and expose it for the sun, and then it will darken it, or vice versa, and experiment, because when you touch it, you can change what it is that, you can change the light meter.
Thank you.
So Shelley, how much do you fiddle with your pictures? Close.
I don't fiddle with them very much, but I'm glad that I can fiddle with them some. I do not, I don't know how to do.
We reviewed video surveillance from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which clearly shows Kobayashi crossing the United States border on foot into Mexico.
Oh, I know.
With the luggage and appeared unarmed. At this time, Kobayashi's case has been classified as a voluntary missing.
Yeah.
So I definitely will crop pictures, resize them, straighten them, and so forth. I will change the shadows. I'll use these gliders and so forth and change the shadows and bring down the highlights and stuff like that. I will increase the saturation very little. The vibrancy I'll increase. There's something else, texture I'll increase. So, you know, a few percentage points, it often improves it. That's about it. It's just because I don't know how to do more. I would like to, I'd like to learn how to do masking and a whole bunch of things, but I don't do composites and I don't, yeah. I mean, my hope is to get it right in the first place. And then after that, it is playing, which is a wonderful thing to do. I mean, to do the kind of thing that Mickey does and so forth.
Okay, one more and then. All right, well, let's take our break. We'll set up.
Recording.
Oh, right, okay, so our final speaker of the course is Robin
Obi.
Obi. Obi.
Just say all the letters.
Obi. And Robin also had a career at UCSC in various technological services, etc. But now she has become and has been for a long time a photographer.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you. I'm so excited to share some time with you and share bits and pieces of my photography catalog. I started taking pictures when I was about 8 years old. How many of you had an Instamatic camera? How many of your parents or yourself or siblings or uncle that had a slide camera, like an AGFA or something like that? And it used to be family time, right? You would get out the vacation slides, you gather around. Sometimes if you were lucky, you had snacks, and you would spend an hour going through the slides. The only potty break was when the slide jammed, remember? And they'd stop and cuss and they'd fiddle with it and poke the slide up and then continue on. My dad was an amateur photographer. He loved photography. He had all the gadgets. He had the slide camera. He had the Yashica twin lens reflex. He had the not video, but the movie cameras back in the day. And in the olden days, we may remember when you had movie cameras with film, you'd have to wind it up and it would run, and then you'd have to flip the reel over. I don't know if those of you in the audience remember that, but that was crazy time. Well, we always knew it was Dad's movie because we always saw his forehead when he was painting and rewinding the film. So we always got an intermission with my dad's forehead. My mom, on the other hand, was, besides being a brilliant school teacher in math and science, she was also a painter. So at 8 years old and on, I was significantly influenced about how to see the world in different ways. And a lot of times the way I see the world is through a lens. So I'm a terrible landscape photographer. It's just too big for me. And I have thousands and thousands of images in my catalog. And I'm not going to show you all of them. And part of that is the good news. Part of trying to discern what to talk to you about today is how do we find a muse in our photography? Each of the photographers that you've listened to talk a little bit of their vision, their intention, their passion about whether it's wildlife or it's landscape or it's being able to build that depth or it's moments of light. My muse has come in different ways. Oh, bring it back. Thank you. In different ways, in that I have always been very eclectic in my taste of what I photograph. I call myself an opportunistic photographer. I'm self-taught. I'm instinctual about what it is I see and what I shoot. And because of Mom's painter angel on my shoulder, from time to time, I have painterly whims. So finding the light, this happens to be my granddaughter, and I call her my hidden redhead. I have 3 grandchildren, and so she has this gorgeous dark hair, but when the sun hits it, she gets this red glow. Flowers, jellyfish, and sometimes a little landscape. I got my first digital camera in about 2010. From prior to that, I had a Canon A1, so as a film shooter with lots of lenses. I love that camera. I had 2 of them. I wore one out and ended up getting another one. I wore it out. As Barry mentioned, I had many reincarnations at UCSC. I think I moved offices. I counted it up, Shelly, as a crack up about 33 times. I had 33 different desks. But my job was always within the computer center. So one of my first jobs at the computer center is they asked me, because I had some prior graphic artist experience, they asked me if I would put together the computer center guide. So this is the cover I shot with. I had to insist on buying a new macro to be able to shoot computer parts on a light table with my macro. And my inspiration was National Geographic during that time period. And this was early 80s, kind of 82 to 85. Yes, I'm of that age. That they were doing this wonderful photography of macro photography and different images of light. How many of you in your household had a subscription to National Geographic? And still do. That was, those images was such an impactful burning in my mind's eye of what photography could be, should be, might be, adventure, what could be. The other piece of my childhood is I'm an adrenaline junkie. Roller coasters, thrill ride, I'm your girl. In addition to that, from the time of about 5 years old to 9 years old, we lived on the far west side by the west entrance of UCSC. And so you had Meter Creek, then you had the bridge to the Wilder and Cave Gulch. I was gone all day. They didn't know where I was. That was an adventure coming home. The best story about that adventure, I was exploring. I was making up things in the woods. I was discovering the fish hatchery that was up there. I was going into caves. I usually had a companion with me, so it's like swim with a buddy when you go out adventuring. But part of that also framed how I saw the world in doing that. So having National Geographic as an escape gave me that view into the world. Fast forward into the 2000s and about 2010, my dad had died in 2008. Besides being a great photographer, he was an absolutely wonderful cook. If you called him chef, he would have been offended. He thought that was too snooty. But a great cook. And I was missing him and cooking with him terribly. And at that time, my youngest son kept asking me for family recipes. And those of us of an age, we'd write them down on a 3x5 card, right? And hand them over and go, there's your recipe. But being a techie girl, as I was at the time, developing web pages and learning technologies and stuff like that, I said, heck no, I'm not doing that. I'll post it on a blog space. You can look it up anytime you want. And there it'll be. And then if your brother wants it or your sister wants it or the cousin wants it, it's there and I don't have to worry about it and think about it again. So I started food blogging, good grief. But what it allowed me to do was two things. One, it allowed me to honor some of the family recipes and stories and also expand some creativity. And part of that creativity is food photography. Oh, who doesn't love luscious pictures of food? Well, the first years were really ugly, muddy, terrible pictures of food. And it's not that I compete with other photographers, but I compete with myself. And so I certainly compare and I look at what my images might be and how can I improve them. So that and my love of travel, that little spur of National Geographic, a few trips with my mom, right? I hopped on a plane and I went to Italy for a food photography and a writing workshop in Tuscany in a villa. Who wouldn't go? I had the best time. But in addition to that, it changed my mindset of why I was doing photography. In my world, my little bubble of my food blog and such, even though I was part member of the International Association of Culinary Professionals, I was the editor of their Food Stylists and Food Photographers newsletter. And this is while I was still working. This was my side gig, side fun project, passion project. I was just photographing in a very isolated way. My audience was very isolated. I have never ascribed to be a commercial photographer or a photographer that does big shows or thing like that. I'm very reserved in my audience, and oftentimes I shoot for myself, as you do, right? You want to capture that moment in time and relive that moment that you had. So this changed my muse, just going to Italy, because I was not only photographing food, but I was traveling to photograph. And that's a different mindset than travel, taking pictures of my travel. And that was a huge shift for me. And this was about 2010 that this occurred. So I started to get pretty good at the food photography thing because, one, I upgraded my camera. I got a nice digital 5D Mark III. I got a nice 100mm macro lens. And the funny thing about shooting food is it doesn't move. You can play with the lighting and the plating and stuff like that and get a really nice result. In addition to that, with a 100mm lens, you are this close, you are close. And so it is a very intimate experience. Your mind's eye is drawn to the details, to the light, to the texture. My goal in the food photography goes, do you want to reach through and take a bite of that? And if I could elicit that emotion, then I felt I was successful in doing that. And then, of course, I wrote the story like that. Well, back in 2018, there was a series called Open Show in Santa Cruz. I don't know if any of you had visited or went to the presentation. It's like speed dating with photographers. You have 10 minutes to do your presentation. And my friend Lori Aiello, a colleague from UCSC, she said, you know, I had been posting on Instagram and Facebook, whatever, food images. She said, maybe you should apply to open show. See what happens. And who knew? They said, come on down. Well, that was my first presentation outside my little bubble. I'm basically, you wouldn't know it, but basically I'm a kind of a shy girl. And especially if I am to present things that are so personal to me as my photographs, because each of us have an emotional investment in the pictures we take, especially if we go through the time of culling them through the thousands, doing a little post-production, and then I'm going to show you this. You're going to see it and get some kind of reaction to that. So I did my spiel, my 10-minute spiel open show, and who was going to sit there but Mark Overgaard? Okay, at the time, I didn't know diddly squat about CODA. I was like Shelly. She may have known about the organization, but I certainly didn't. And Mark talked to me afterwards and said, hey, I liked your presentation. How about coming and doing CODA sometime? Okay. So then I had to expand the presentation from 10 minutes to an hour. Boy, big thing. But what changed that was two things. One, I got a little more comfortable sharing in person, in real. And two, I reconnected with this woman right here, this wonderful Shelly Errington, who we had worked together at UCSC on various projects together. And we got to talking, and she had me over to lunch, and she said, oh, I'm going to Pottsboro for the Day of the Dead. And oh, there's extra seats in the thing, and I'm trying to find somebody to fill the tour with my friend Rick Hall. And I said, well, I could go. Totally spontaneous. I think it floored her a little bit that I said that. She said, well, really? And I said, no, really, I think I would like to go. And so I changed the focus of my muse again. So not only was I going to travel to photograph, but the subject matter of my photography was going to be different. It was going to be for the Day of the Dead. And so I was shifting my mindset to what imagery, what connection, what emotion, what do I want to capture out of my trip? So at this point, it was 2019, and I had just lost my mom in August. So to say that my trip during the Day of the Dead festivities was a catharsis and a healing of my grief is kind of an understatement. But in addition to that, I had to put on my Stephen McCurry hat, because the images I wanted to capture were not necessarily the iconic images. And certainly there will be some of those in my catalog of that. But I really wanted to reflect what I saw in the people, the heart I felt of the people, the emotion I felt in the people. So these images, and I know they're a little bit small, but I didn't want to overload you because this is a portion where you have thousands in your catalog and you don't want to overdo. But during the Day of the Dead on Halloween night, or the 31st of October, before the families bring their altars to the cemetery for that first celebration of their loved one who passed in the last year, they wait a year before they have the altar celebration. And they go to the church and they have blessing of the altars. It is the biggest, wildest party you have ever seen. It is amazing. So they have these festoons, gloriously marigold and flowers, altars built up, and you can see in the background of the middle one just a little piece of that. But the priests bless the altars, and the families that have are a little more well-to-do, they have family bands. They hire bands, and it was pouring down rain. Shelly will remember we were in ponchos and boots and wet, and they were marching in the rain. And so for me, I found a location by a street light, so I knew that I would get some light because I was shooting without a flash and it was handheld with my long lens. And I wanted to capture the faces as they went by. And so the musician, the modern day Katrina, and the boy with his candle in the procession as they walk through from the blessing of the church to the cemetery to place the altar. These are the people I wanted to remember when I went. It was fantastic. It was cold as heck. Freezing. Yeah. So after I did that trip with Rick Hall and Zocalo Folk Art and Tours, he offered a trip to go to the carnivals in Hidalgo. And each of these small remote towns celebrate carnival differently. The masks, the body paint, the processions, the gaiety, as they have their festivities before Ash Wednesday. This is a child, this was oh, now I'm going to forget the name of it. In Hidalgo. It was the biggest city in Hidalgo. So all the schools got together and had children dress up for the theme of the Nautilus for that particular year. And I had a dear friend when we were on our Day of the Dead trip, and he was a fellow photographer, and he said, if you've got a blank wall, just put a chair near it and somebody will come up and they'll want to pose. People love to have their picture taken. So these children, the parade had ended and they were still milling about, and I just loved the looks of these kids. They were just so wonderful. And so I asked them, I said, would you, and the wall was great. There's your wall, Shelly. That wall was great. And I said, would you stand here and let me take your picture? So catching his face.
Is that a cell phone in his?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cell phone in his wall. Oh, these are very hip kids. Some of the girls in there, those were like Dior gowns. They were still decorated with the seeds and the corn and all of that, but they were off the shoulder and a little foo-foo. It was fabulous. Someone had serious sewing skills to do that. So these villages experience either masked or unmasked dances and rituals that culminate in Ash Wednesday. And these events are all not only pre-Lenten customs, but their context is often has to do with the upcoming planting season. So they're mixing the Catholic culture and their prehistoric culture together, their native cultures together in establishing these parades. So taking stories from the Bible and interpreting in their own way as they march around. And in Carpinteros, it was fabulous. What they did is all the masked marchers would go house to house. And then each house would display food and drinks and beverages and welcome in, and they would honor them because they had no real downtown. There was nowhere to really do that kind of parade. And they danced, and these masks were fabulous. Some of them were just gorgeous, you know, sequenced or painted, and some of them were handed down father to son, because traditionally most of the masked marchers are men. And that changed a bit. Let me go back. As you see, this delightful person here, that's Nancy. She and I became buds. And she's about 13. And she was joining in the marches because in like so many villages and stuff around the world, the young people move away for opportunities. And so the families move away and the villages become smaller and smaller. So women and children and girls begin to fill in the void that had been exclusively a male-dominated festival. We then went to Tamañón in Hidalgo, and their traditions was body painting. And it was fantastic to watch them paint their bodies in the different ways. We have head to toe in green and feathers. And this guy, I think he's a little gangster, just maybe a little bit. But the whole town, and they have a beautiful covered awning for in bad weathers, almost a football field size covered area, where the whole town had gathered, and they would march around and sing within that area. So here's what I learned about my muse from these 2 trips. I love people. I'm engaged with the people, and they interest me, and I soak up their humanity. And that's what I try to capture. Besides, the adrenaline junkie in me loved standing in the middle of the street trying to get the shot and have the parade kind of go around me. That was way fun. So my muse said, there's an upcoming trip to Mongolia. Do you want to go? She raised her hand. She said, pick me. So off I went. It took me, with many of these photographic tour trips, stuff like that, you book a year in advance. You may, just to get in, you wait list because they only take 8 people, generally 8 to 10 people, something like that. So off I went to Mongolia. I had never been to Central Asia before. I'd been plenty of Europe trips, but never Central Asia. But the story falling back into UCSC, I was a book nerd as well as an adventure junkie when I was a kid. And one of my most favorite exercises, I would go in the library and I would just go through the stacks until a book called me. And I pull it out. Well, McHenry Library, UCSC, when I first got my library card in '82, I did that same exercise. So I was upstairs in the nonfiction stack. And an old brown volume called to me. I picked it up. And it was a Jesuit priest's diary of his trip to Mongolia, to the court of Kublai Khan, and the adventure there and back in the Silk Road. So when this photographic tour came up, that again came forth, and I said, of course, I'm going to go. So the first stop was in Ulaanbaatar, and we visited on our free day the monastery there. Now I'm going to butcher this, I hope, but not too badly. The Gandan Chingling Monastery in Ulaanbaatar, and it is the center of Buddhism in all of Mongolia. So there's a university there, and there's rebuilt temple buildings. And it's an active monastery with over 100 monks as well. This particular statue is 85 feet tall, and it was rebuilt. It was destroyed in the 30s during the Soviet occupation of Mongolia, at which time so much was suppressed. Their language was suppressed. Their written script was suppressed. They were told they couldn't worship in the way they wanted to because they were anti-religion. They couldn't display their cultural individualities of being either Kazakhs or Mongols or whatever. They had to restrict what they did, their folk art, their folk food, all of those kinds of things. And so in 1996, they were able to rebuild the statue, and they got funding for that. It was pretty miraculous. This is within the teaching monastery. So I was sitting on a bench, and I had my camera, and I just did this little snap. So it's a snapshot. Not all of it is in focus I would love, but I kind of like the movement of it. But I just loved the interaction of the young pupil and his master as they were chatting together within the monastery. In addition to Buddhism in Mongolia, shamanism is very important to them. It is essentially the folk religion or the Tangerism that has been part of the Mongol society since pre-written history. And the practice, like many of the other things, was heavily suppressed by Soviet occupation. The shamanism is their worship around the earth, the sky, and animals. But what, in addition to that, is they've also adopted some of Buddha's teachings within that as it developed later on going. This young man is the chief shaman for all Mongolia. He's in his 20s. So part of what Mongolia has been doing since 1990, since the Soviet Union withdrew, is rediscovering their self. And so he had a shamanistic calling at a very young age. And he has disciples on whom he teaches the lesson. And part of it is, you notice you see the swastika there and you think, huh, what's that? Well, in Buddhism and in the shamanism, it is a cause pattern, and it has meaning for long life, eternity, and consistency. Pre-Soviet Union, that was a symbol of, one of the symbols of Mongolia in of itself, before the 30s and the whole nightmare of the Nazis obscured the symbol. But for them, it meant long life, eternity, goodwill. And you will see it in other parts of Asia too, in that are practicing Buddhists. He was just magnificent. He was so overwhelmed. So what they do, much like the whirling dervishes, they get in their regalia and they have their drums, and then they beat their drums and then they spin. And it's like calling the earth to them. He was so overwhelmed, he had to stop for whatever vibes, whatever. And so this image is one of my favorites because he's just taking a quiet moment. Him in the steps. He was a lovely person.
What time of the year were you there?
July. So that part of Mongolia from Ulaanbaatar, before the Gobi Desert, high in the mountains, you get a lot of water from the Altai and the other mountain ranges. So it is very green pastoral.
Robin, you might move your cursor.
Okay. I'm pointing. Horse culture. We're going to talk about horses now. So in preparation for this trip to Mongolia, because it was a year away, I went down to a place called Return to Freedom, which is a wild horse sanctuary where they save the BLM Mustang and put them in large open country spaces to practice photographing horses, because I knew I was going to see them. So in Mongolia, 25 to 40% of the population is still nomadic and pastoral. They still raise goats and sheep and horses and cattle. And what's particularly interesting is that much of what they do is on open government land, and nobody owns this land. It's just free pasture. So we visited this family who has this horse herd, and those are called gurs. They're not yurts. In Mongolia, they're gurs. And they're actually very cozy, lovely, wonderful inside. And they were showing us a bit of their horsemanship. And this was just the wildest contraption. For lasso, instead of throwing the rope like American cowboys, they have this long pole with a rope at the end of it. And they lasso it around and then secure the rope to cut out animals from the herd. So these beautiful horses are the white horses of Inki Dambi, who is an artist, a photographer, a entrepreneur and a revival of Mongolian culture. He has built a place called the Mongol Nomadic Tourist Camp, where he has about 25 gers as hotel rooms, very nicely decked out. Has a cafeteria, restaurant, coffee bar. He has an art gallery, has little shops, all in gers around. And one of his passions are these white Mongolian ponies as part of his herd. Oh, I loved them. Part of what we were able to participate in is to watch some displays of horsemanship, and this was this most expert horseman bringing the ponies in for us to see from back in a further pasture. He's an amazing horseman.
Does he use it?
Yes, he has a saddle. So part of the festivities were we got to participate in what's called a mini Nadam. A Nadam is a folk festival where they have dancing and wrestling and games of chance and horse races, archery, whatever. And so there in July, there's a huge national Nadam where hundreds of thousands of people go, and it lasts weeks and weeks, and it's in July, and it's hot and it's awful. And we were lucky enough to be in this little camp, and he puts together these smaller regional festivals a couple of times a year. And so we timed our trip there so that we could participate in photo. So part of the game of skill, right? Is the horseman's skills. You throw the hat down and said, "Can you get that hat?" Oh yeah, you can get that.
Robin, it's been a challenge to get this picture. Where were you?
Oh,
How you get
okay.
there? Yeah.
Okay. One, I had upgraded my camera. So I went mirrorless. So I had my R5. I had a 100-500 lens. And so I was standing way over there. So he was coming towards us. So we were able to kind of shift as he was coming towards us, but I was that far away and using my 500, and I was able to crop this a bit so we could see. I love being able to see the dirt kicked up. That freeze frame, that moment in time, that's my inner little box I like to tick that excites me.
To mention the name.
Yeah, the name is awesome.
Oh, isn't that awesome? Wasn't that beautiful? Just the fur of it. So yeah, horse races, but look who the racers, who's racing? These kids. He's 7, maybe, on that horse. And so what's really cool, they take them about 1.5 miles out, and they have 2 adults that kind of ride with them to make sure they're safe. You can see the adults there. And they say, "Ready, set, go." And they head off. And they just pour down across the plateau to us. And lucky winner. Oh, they were having such a good time. That's so cute. And this just gives you proportion of one of the racers. And gives you a little sense of scene of the mini Nadam and the festival and how it was set up for us. Those of you that love horses, that just you go, oh, can't help it. Their manes, the textures, the physicality of their muscles, they're just fabulous. I enjoyed them very much. However, I wasn't there just for the horses. I knew that's almost a side note. I was there for the eagles. I was there for the eagles. So a little bit about eagle hunters. There's 2 varieties. There are those that actually do it as part of their herding culture and how they keep and protect their flocks and their herds from predators, foxes, sometimes wolves, other kinds of predators. And what they do is, and in the other case is that they have competitions for skill with their eagles. So like time trial, can you get the badger out of the hole, variety, a variety of things that they have at eagle festivals to see who's the best of the best of the best on horsemanship and with their eagle. They capture fledgling eaglets, and these are female eagles because they're bigger and heavier and have wider wingspans than the male eagles. And they catch it as a fledgling, and then they raise it and keep that bird with a tight human bird bond for about 5 years. And then after the 5 years, they release it back in the wild, is the tradition. So this is one of the hunters that just before we did a practice time trial before releasing the eagle to then go down to his master somewhere on a horse calling him on the valley floor and to then capture the horse.
Is that eagle tethered to his arm? Is it
It-
just really likes being there?
both. He is tethered, they are tethered, but then they are released. And once they're released, it was a lot of side stories that I'll get into about that. So the eagle hunters arrived to the valley and we got to see some nomadic gers setting up and a variety of other things. A little bit of reflection, I like that. A little water splash, I like that.
It's cold.
So where was Robin? Barry would ask.
You were on a horse.
I was on the floor. I was in the dirt. I was in the dirt.
Then 5 minutes later, you were heading to the hospital. Yeah.
Well, funny thing, no, it didn't get quite like that. So to mention is these eagle hunters do this to promote their culture and to support their family and to increase tourism into Mongolia. So they are very amenable to these photo tours about ride quarter-mile away, turn around and come at the group. And I don't fault them for that because they had spent so many years of being oppressed and suppressed that they couldn't live their culture. So the only way I got that shot is because I was with the photo tour. If I had been at the other large festival that's in September, October, getting the right position at all would have been dicey, trying to get a place for that. So they kept coming closer. And I started out with my long lens, but I was tethered. I had 2 cameras on because they told me you should bring 2 cameras. I said, oh, in case one fails, right? But also I have my long lens and then I had my small lens. So then I had my shorter lens on my hip. This is as he rode by, as I pulled up my shorter lens. This is my selfie. I felt the dirt hit my head as he went by. And they have such supreme confidence in their horsemanship that they felt perfectly comfortable in riding and splitting that gap and not hurting anybody. It was pretty amazing. This is why I went. This was the adrenaline junkie moment, let me tell you, to have those horses ride by and then to be so excited that I had anything in focus. This is like, I win. So part of the story, we talked a little bit about how in Mexico and other places, females are beginning to take on what were non-traditional roles. And there's a great movie about an eagle huntress that you can get on Netflix or Prime or whatever. And I encourage you to see that. But this is our own little mighty girl. She has been trained, she's 13 years old. She's been training with her dad, who is one of those writers, since she was about 8. And Aya Nodar, she is so humble, kind, sweet, and the bond between herself and that eagle is like one you would see between a human and its dog. They just knew each other. They were bonded. They loved each other. That I've never seen an eagle nuzzle a human before, but this one did. Absolutely did. So in the story, previously, we talked about the hunter on a high hill, right? So the group of hunters, for our benefit, okay, they sent a hunter on the hill with her eagle. And they said, we'll time it and see how well she does. And have that eagle released and have it fly to her arms. What joy in her face as the eagle clutches her wrist. And the cool thing is, the other more mature hunters did a few rounds too. She beat them every time. and truly, it's because of that bond between herself and her eagle. It was truly amazing.
What are they hunting again?
In traditional aspects, foxes, wolves, any kind of predators that would harm their herds, they would use in a combination of the eagles and the herdsmen would work as a team to bring down something or injure something enough that they could then kill the bigger animals, then they could take that bigger animal out. In these instances, it's merely for skill in these images and this particular practice. But I was so happy to get this portrait of her. And that was one of my goals, is how can I improve my natural portraits of people without the stand and grin kind of picture.
So Robin, if she's been doing this for 5 years, she didn't have to release that eagle and start renewing?
Traditionally, maybe, but they're holding on to this one for a little while longer. And I have some questions, whether in this scenario, they really release them in the wild. Are they too tame to be able to survive on their own? Are they really well adapted to hunt? Those in the mountains that do it in the traditional way, there's no question that those are hunting beasts. But these, nah, I don't know. They start young, and they start with little falcons in training on how to handle. They're so cute. I love this the back end and the beauty of their coats as they rode back across the plateau. And as Ainadar, she's on the end.
What is the season of these
This
pictures?
is in July, so it's summer.
And they're wearing fur.
Yes. It was chilly on the plateau at the high elevations. It is chilly. It can get hot, but again, they were dressed in traditional regalia for our benefit.
What is the elevation?
Some thousands of feet. I don't know. I know the higher ones are really high. And after this trip, I took another part a road trip, and we went up to 12,000 feet in the Tian Shan Mountains. So it's in between kind of 5,000 to 6,000 feet and higher. So working on my portraiture, we went to a lake, and these gentlemen allowed us to put them through some paces and get their photographs. I just love it. It was beautiful. We got to the lake, it was sunset. I got the beautiful light and just the character of their face was so beautiful. there's kind of a, despite the traditional embroidery work and all of that, that is like a regalia, right? It just seems so rich, but they just look kind of regal. And we had some fun on the water too. This is Tobol Nur at sunset. And so I said goodbye to the eagle hunters. And I came back on the bus and on an airplane, and then I went for another 10 days in 4 stands in Central Asia after that. But that's another time. Eagle hunters.
Thank you. Questions for Robin?
Somebody is still on, so don't put it.
I don't have a question. Oh, I do. Did you have fun? My little travelogue, did it remind you of watching the slideshow with Uncle George?
Well, this has been such a great part. Why don't the 3 of you stand up? We have to thank all of them. I know that at least Mark and Kevin and the others have been watching this on YouTube.
Oh,
Well, this is one of our all-time great courses, and of course, we expected the photography to be great, and it was great, but it was the personal aspect that you threw into it. That was really appreciated, so thank you.
everyone
so
a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you a lot. All
Thank
right.
you. Did you have a question? Thank you. Okay.
Still have